Hi, so I'm working on a bit of machine automation, and it's a heavy duty machine. It's a punch press, so it needs a bit of force behind it, and that means finding a motor. Now I've got a couple of options, but one of the really cool options is this thing. It's a windscreen wiper motor. Now they're awesome, hey? You can find them in scrap. There are a huge variety of prices. They're incredibly strong, so there's enough in there actually to break a finger if you get it caught, so really strong motors. But the problem with using them is there's a huge variety. You find 6-wire, 5-wire, 4-wire, separate earth, chassis earth, different ways of implementing parking, all kinds of stuff that makes it very confusing on knowing how to use these things. But actually these things are in fact relatively simple. There are two functions. One is the park function. That is, when you turn off the wiper motor, it needs to go back to a home position. And the other thing is the variable speed, because you usually have low speed, you sometimes have low, medium, high, or low and high, and you can have an auto speed, so there are different speeds, and that gives you different wires in there. That can be kind of confusing, especially tracing what the hell is happening. Now, the first thing to think about is this home function, because you'll see two wires in there going to home. Now, the home function is implemented by something called an OR gate. An OR gate is where it will operate if one switch or the other switch are on, it will still operate. Now, an OR gate arranged with switching looks like this. Now I've implemented just that circuit right here. I've got my battery, I've got my motor, and I've got a couple of switches here. These are normally open switches, so I have to press them to close them to operate them. Now I've connected them in parallel, and what that means is two of the switches are connected to each other right there, and that's going to the battery. Then one switch goes to the live, and the other switch goes to the live. So whichever one of those I press, that motor is going to work. So if I press that one, motor works. If I press that one, motor works. Awesome. Press both together, the motor works. So those switches, one or the other or both, will make that motor work. Now, in your wiper motor, one of the switches is obviously the switch you've got on the dashboard, and you turn that off or on to make the thing operate. The other one is right here. It's actually just a plate, a little metal plate. When that metal plate on the cog contacts to two little prongs sticking down there, that makes the switch. Now you see different ways of doing this. Sometimes they're powered by a cam, sometimes there's a button, sometimes there's a plate, sometimes there are slips, all kinds of ways. But that's basically what happens, is that switch is always in the same position relative to the two contacts that it's going to touch. So when you turn off the dashboard, that is effectively still on until that cam moves in position, and it then turns off. So you have to constantly feed a power supply into that, obviously, and you just do that with a little loop wire, and you'll see that in the contactor, but it maintains the contact until the cam is in the right position, and it turns itself off. Now, normally in a cam one, it is push to brake. Here what we've got, because we've got a plate with two switches, is push to make. But the Nissan always also comes with this mysterious bit of green electronics. No idea what's in there. But the theory is the same. You have two switches attached to the motor. One, which is the park switch, is on until it reaches a fixed position relative to the plate or the cam, and that then turns off because the logic is an OR logic of two switches. So that's how you deal with that. Now, if you're not going to use the park function, of course, it's completely irrelevant. If you are going to use the park function, which can be very useful, particularly for controlling stop-start, then you would use it as a second switch, maybe in line with the relay, doing something like latching and push to brake, push to make, something like that. Second part of these things are obviously these bits here, which are the bits that go to the coil. Now again, Nissan have been a little odd in this, in that the ground is not on the case, and you can check that just by connecting up to the wires on a multimeter, touching the case somewhere and seeing if you have a contact. If the coil inside the motor is grounded to the case, you'll get a low resistance reading telling you it's grounded to the case. It isn't. So I tested the resistivity of that and the resistivity of these, obviously, to make sure that there were contacts between these two. Now, the really cool thing about this is we can connect it up and get different speeds just by switching on the thing. So if I connect that to there, and I tested this earlier, so I know in this case my red is my negative. It actually doesn't matter. If I swap it round, all that will happen is the motor will reverse direction. So it really doesn't matter if I put my red as ground or my red as live. And if I touch one of the other wires, we get the motor turning at a speed. If I touch the other wire, whoops, then we get the motor turning at a slower speed. So that's low, that's high. And if I swap them round, it reverses. How about that? So wiper motors actually aren't that difficult to understand and work out what's going on with them, as long as you remember there are two functions being taken care of in there. The park is just a switch. It's a switch that operates with a dashboard switch in an OR configuration. The motor wires themselves are really just speed control wires, and we've got 3 in there because we've got 1 going into and 2 coming out at different positions instead of being grounded here. But you can work that stuff out really easily by testing the resistances and seeing which one is the lower resistance and which one's the higher resistance, and whether there's continuity between one of the wires in the case. You can test this out really easily just by unscrewing it and having a look, to be honest. Anyway, I thought that would be of interest because we may well be using that wiper motor in this application, and I thought I would share those thoughts with you because I think it might help you to work out what's going on with your own wiper motor. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching.